if it doesn't feel exactly right, that's okay. It's a new skill that you're building. That takes practice, that takes a lot of learning, and it takes a lot of grace. Giving yourself that space to experience the challenges, learn ways that help you to navigate them without putting high expectations on yourself. This is not a race. And I find that the people who struggle the most early in their fasting schedule are those who are trying to hurry and get somewhere very quickly instead of giving themselves that time to go through and learn everything they need to learn and be kind and gentle with themselves. Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Coach Terri Lance, and I am here in a solo episode today talking about something that I don't know that I've ever really talked about with you all, and that is what to expect in early fasting. What we find is that oftentimes when people first begin fasting, they run into some things that make them fearful, uncomfortable, and they feel like things are a little bit unpredictable. Unfortunately, this often leads them to think that maybe they're doing something wrong or maybe even dangerous. So let's focus on what happens when we first start fasting. One of the most common concerns we hear from people starting fasting is that it just feels hard. They feel hungry. They maybe notice some lower energy, or even they feel worried that they might be starving themselves. So today, we're going to walk through what's actually normal in the early stages and how to think about those experiences differently. Why does fasting feel so difficult when you first get started? First, I want to talk about just how uncommon it feels to us. We are used to eating often. Those of us living in parts of the world where we have easy access to food and we have food culture that tells us to eat often, we are used to eating whatever we want, whenever we want it. So fasting first just feels like we are swimming upstream. We are doing something that is so outside of our norm that it's almost unimaginable. Now, if we think about what eating actually does for our body, it provides fuel. So our bodies are set up with a signaling system that lets us know we need to replenish the fuel. Now, the challenging part of this is that nowadays, with our current food culture, we have constant access to new fuel coming in while we also have plenty of stored fuel on our bodies. So when we decide to start fasting, we are now asking our body to postpone or ignore the signals that were originally built in to help with our survival, to make sure that we didn't starve. So that constant flow of energy coming in from new food, as well as the excess stored energy, means a feeling of safety and comfort. Now we decide to fast. Now, in general, at this stage, most of us have developed a way of experiencing food in that we have access to food and we eat whenever we want. Our body is actually used to kind of a constant supply of meals coming in as well as snacks. And if you picture this, it's almost like a baby bird where the parent bird brings food on demand. Those little beaks are opening, squawking, and the parent comes in and feeds them. That's what we do for our body. When there isn't fuel available, we haven't eaten recently, our body has created a wonderful system of signals, hormones that let us know we're running low on that fuel source and we need to bring in some more. The problem isn't that we don't have a new supply of energy, it's that we've got an excess amount of stored energy on our body, namely body fat. So when we decide to start fasting, what we're doing is asking our body to postpone or ignore those signals that were originally built to keep it feeling safe and for survival. Early on in the fasting development, as you're working on building a fasting habit and build your fasting muscle, because our body is used to having that constant supply of accessible energy from that food that's constantly trickling in, at first, we might not even notice that it has stopped. And then the body gets to a point where it realizes that supply has been depleted, and it sends out these alert signals. We know them as hunger, and it asks us to replenish this supply. Now, when we first start fasting and try to ignore these hunger signals, they might even feel a little bit stronger or more evident. This is partly due to the body's fear mechanism. One of its jobs is to make sure that we survive. And suddenly you are doing something that poses almost danger to that old primitive survival part of us. The other thing early on in the fasting is that for many of us, fasting is such a habitual thing. We eat at a certain time. We eat in many social situations. We eat for many reasons outside of hunger. And so we're also then suddenly missing out on those purposes of eating. When I first started fasting, for me, it was much less about any physical hunger sensations, but it was much more about missing out on the satisfaction of eating, the boredom, the missing of just tasting something. So we get all of these things kind of wrapped into one. Our body is recognizing that its easy access to fuel has been depleted. It is sending out hunger signals. We're missing out on some of those social cues and habit cues, and it feels difficult. I think one of the important things for all of us to recognize is that this is so natural. Of course it feels difficult. But the fact that it feels difficult doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong, doesn't mean that it's something dangerous or that we need to stop. We do need to learn the difference, though, between hunger, what is natural, what is safe, and what is actually a sign that something is wrong. One quick question I would encourage you to ask yourself is this uncomfortable? Or does this feel unsafe? I think many of us will be able to tell the difference between hunger, little uncomfortable to not be fueling it, versus something that is progressively getting worse or physically concerning. So what does typical hunger really appear as if we're experiencing it? Stomach sensations, like you might feel like your stomach is empty. You might hear it growling or even have like a hollow feeling. You might notice that thoughts about food come and go in waves. You might notice a mild decrease in your focus or patience. Oftentimes, these hunger sensations improve if we take in some water, electrolytes, if we move around a little bit, if we distract ourselves, if we get some rest, or even just let some time pass. They don't generally create a sense of panic, and you still generally feel like yourself. So what does it feel like, or what do you notice if something more serious is happening? This might be experienced like dizziness that doesn't seem to improve. Obviously, fainting or feeling close to fainting is a sign that something more serious than hunger is happening. Chest pain, confusion or disorientation, shakiness that becomes severe, an inability to function normally, or symptoms that are rapidly worsening, feeling physically unsafe rather than simply hungry, or symptoms that are just unusual for your body. Remember that hunger comes and goes in a pulsing kind of rhythm. Comes in hunger waves that actually get worse and then ease up, and then will maybe grow again later and then ease up. Whereas a medical issue or Physical distress, it just tends to escalate. It doesn't pulse and get better and then come back. So we need to be paying attention to these things to make sure that we do understand that if we have any reason to be unsafe, that we do need to stop the fast immediately. Once we've learned to get past those conditioned pieces of hunger and even those initial hunger waves, as we start to learn to fast more, our hunger tends to settle down a little bit more. So what tends to happen as we start to fast more is that our body learns that it is safe and that there is fuel available. It just needs to go do a little more work to attain it. So those little birds in the nest, instead of the parent bird feeding them on demand, they're going to need to learn to get out of that nest and go and find the food. This is how they grow and develop, right? So our brain, our body develops as well. It learns that there actually is stored fuel available, this body fat, but it is harder work to go get that stored body fat than to activate hunger signals and get you to provide more food. During this adaptation, your body gets more efficient and it knows how to go get that fuel rather than waiting for you to fuel it. And it starts moving into that more naturally. You might not even notice after a period of time that you've now reached 20 hours or 24 hours or more. Your body has just naturally transitioned from burning the easily accessible glucose in your body to now burning body fat. You might even hear this being referred to as your body becoming more fat adapted. So ultimately, your body doesn't keep asking you to feed it since it's fully capable of meeting its fuel needs just fine. Sometimes people wonder if this is okay for me to be doing. How come my energy level feels a little more low or inconsistent when they first start fasting? Again, this is totally normal. Remember how I've talked about our body is used to constant new energy coming in, very easily accessible energy. And now you're not just putting that in all the time, you're actually asking your body to go do some work and get that body fat. So at first, it does lag a little. It almost chugs. It's almost like if your car engine needs a new fuel filter and it's just having a little bit harder time getting that new clean energy in there. So you might feel a little bit depleted early on. Should not be completely exhausting, but you might feel your body is, like I said, chugging a little bit. Once you build that fasting muscle and your body adapts, you will probably feel even better fueled and more energy once your body kicks into burning body fat. But it's totally normal that in the beginning, it takes some time to get this process working really smoothly. And again, that does not mean danger. Another thing that many people might run into some concern about early on in their fasting journey is whether they're starving themselves. So how should we maybe be thinking about that? There's a big difference between intentionally fasting versus starving. So I want to make sure that if you are newer to fasting, that you make this really clear distinction for yourself. First, the body's natural state is the fasted state. Our body was actually designed to be able to sustain periods of limited access to fuel or food. It has the ability to switch over to this burning of body fat, this stored energy. Even the fact that we can store energy should tell us this is a natural, safe process. Nourishing the body is so important, though, that you need to plan healthy meals to provide the building blocks and nutrients that your body needs. Now, on the complete opposite ends of this spectrum, starvation means actually preventing the body from receiving adequate nourishment. It means withholding food or not having access to what the body needs. That is not what we're talking about doing with intermittent fasting. We are going to delay sometimes when we eat, might be for a couple of meals, it might be for a couple of days, but we are safe and have that nourishment available so that when we break our fast, our body gets those building blocks and nutrients right away. So we are not starving ourselves. Again, that is a completely different experience. Intermittent fasting is voluntary and it is very mindfully chosen. We plan when we will refuel our body, how we will make sure that our body has all that it will need. We are not withholding in a punitive way, and we are not withholding because of lack of food. Some people might wonder at this point, especially early on if they're struggling, does fasting ever get easier over time? And what changes when it does? For most people, fasting absolutely gets easier with time because your body is so smart that it figures out that it is safe, first of all, and that it actually has access to fuel, even though you haven't eaten today or recently. It knows where to get that fuel and nourishment so that it can safely continue to function just fine. I think the other thing that changes for many of us with this is we are no longer quite as driven by that enjoyment of eating or just wanting to taste something or have the experience of eating. We have learned that there will be a period of time where we won't be engaging that behavior and that there will be another time when we will engage it soon. So there's less urgency about that as people build their fasting muscle. So what are some of the biggest mindset traps that people tend to fall into when they first start fasting? I think one of the first ones that I see a lot of people struggle with is that they think the goal is just to keep stretching how long they wait until they eat. So one day they might wait and eat at 10 a.m. and the next day they wait to eat at noon and then 1 and then 2. And really what they're doing is they're just stretching rather than actually having a plan like I'm going to eat 3 meals today. The next day, I'm going to eat 2 meals. So I'm going to wait from dinner on this night until lunch the next day. Actually having a plan rather than I'm just going to stretch. Remember that fueling our body is really, again, a pulsing system. We have fuel and then our body can access fuel. So we don't want to just keep stretching. We want to actually have intervals of eating and intervals of waiting between meals. If you've listened to any episodes, you probably already know this next mindset trap, but that is that because I might be skipping a meal or fasting, that means it's okay for me to eat kind of continuously during my eating window is what many people would call that. So if I'm going to have a meal at noon and a meal at 6, this mindset trap says I can eat from noon until 6, meaning the whole 6 hours is open and it's okay if I eat that whole time. We definitely do not encourage people to do this because we have what we refer to as time-restricted eating, meaning eating only at meals. I think another big mindset trap that many people fall into, and this is even before they start fasting, but just a way that we've all learned to live perhaps, is that I should never have to feel hungry. Or the mindset of I can't handle my urges. I want to really encourage people to recognize feeling hungry is a totally normal thing, and it is something that we definitely can learn to sit with and become more comfortable with, even though it may still feel a bit uncomfortable. And that our urges for food are just messengers. They're just telling us that we're having some thoughts about food, we're having some hunger signals, we're bored, some emotional responses going on. But just like so many other urges that we don't act on, we don't have to act on the urge to eat. And I guess lastly, I want to address some things about if someone is struggling in the earlier stages of their fasting journey, how should they approach it without giving up? The first thing I would encourage is slow down. Oftentimes, people are so excited about fasting and they know that there are so many positive benefits to it that they just want to jump in and go to the deep end of the pool. So the first thing I would encourage, if you're really struggling, slow down a little bit. If you're generally someone who eats 6 or 7 times a day, work on bringing that down to 4, then bringing it down to 3. Then maybe going to 2 meals a day if that's a pattern that feels realistic for you, but going gradually. If I generally eat 7 times a day, I'm not going to suddenly jump into doing 3 42-hour fasts in a week. That's jumping so quickly and expecting my body to adjust to so many things. It's overwhelming. So slow down is my first recommendation if you find yourself struggling. We talk a lot at TFM about making sure that you take electrolytes. That would give your body sodium to help you hold some of your hydration, as well as magnesium. Oftentimes when people don't feel well as they start fasting, it's because they're lacking electrolytes. We have a lot of resources at TFM. We've done other podcasts and Q&As about this, but electrolytes are something that I encourage people to learn more about as they are working on increasing their fasting abilities. Going back to the mindset just for a moment, the other piece that I want to encourage people to focus on here is that you're doing something new and you're doing something that, again, kind of flies in the face of everything you've learned for the past 30, 40, 50, 60, or 70 years. Please don't expect yourself to do it perfectly. There is no perfect. Expect that it's going to be uncomfortable at times. Expect that you're going to have a lot that you're going to learn in each experience. So if it doesn't feel exactly right, that's okay. It's a new skill that you're building. That takes practice, that takes a lot of learning, and it takes a lot of grace. Giving yourself that space to experience the challenges, learn ways that help you to navigate them without putting high expectations on yourself. This is not a race. And I find that the people who struggle the most early in their fasting schedule are those who are trying to hurry and get somewhere very quickly instead of giving themselves that time to go through and learn everything they need to learn and be kind and gentle with themselves. Now, I didn't mention at all really today that what we choose to eat when we nourish our body is also really important. And I find that many people who struggle with fasting do so because they're kind of ignoring the impact of what they choose to eat. These two things really go hand in hand. Nourishing our body well when it's time to fuel our body, and allowing those spaces between those times of nourishment when we are in the fasted or healing stage is super important. So if you're struggling with fasting, the other thing I would encourage you to look at is, are you eating in a way when it's mealtime for you that is supporting what your body needs? Are you getting protein? Are you getting vegetables? Are you getting healthy fats? Are you getting fiber? What does your body need? Our food doesn't have to be perfect, but if your primary way of eating between the periods of fasting are filled with ultra-processed foods, I guarantee your body's going to have a much more difficult time ever getting used to switching back and forth between fuel sources. It's going to chug a lot more. It's going to give you a lot more hunger signals, and it's going to beg for those more complicated foods. So I just really encourage you to look at how you're taking care of your body with the nutrition during meals to make sure that those two tools, the fasting and the nutrition, are really working together, not opposing each other. So as we wrap up today, I'm hoping that those of you who are newer to the fasting journey take some time to dig into some of these things and do some more exploration. And I would love to hear back from you in the comments or on social media. What surprised you most when you first started fasting? I think the thing that surprised me most when I first started fasting is that I could do it. Because I had a belief that my long history of abusing food and over-consuming and making unhealthy choices with food, that I was condemned to struggle with this forever. And so what surprised me most when I first did my first fast, which was a 3-day fast, I was shocked that I could. So let us know, what surprised you most? And with that, I'm going to say goodbye for today, but we will be back next week with another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. Take good care, everyone.